Jamaica's digital transformation must be built on trust. Trust in our systems, trust in our institutions, and trust that our data is protected. We must, as individuals and collectively, recognize that every breach weakens our economy. Every unprotected data set is a risk, and data protection, privacy, and cybersecurity are not just about defense. It's about resilience, sustainability, and our ability to grow. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, and welcome to the inaugural Data Protection Privacy webinar hosted by the Jamaica Cyber Incident Response Team as a part of the Cyber Incident Response Team Division in the Office of the Prime Minister under the theme Data Privacy for Remote Work, Best Practices, Challenges, and Trends to Watch for 2025 and beyond. We have today a very distinguished speaker who is no stranger to the data protection arena. Ms. Najuequa Barnes is a certified information privacy professional, corporate consultant, development professional, and adjunct lecturer. Her professional experience spans the public and private sector, managing high-level research, providing advisory consultation on varying data privacy, corporate, and international developmental issues for companies both locally and internationally. With a hands-on approach, she has guided public and private sector entities in crafting customized data privacy strategies aligned with Jamaica's Data Protection Act of 2020. Drawing from her expertise cultivated at PricewaterhouseCoopers, where she spearheaded research and training initiatives on the GDPR compliance, she now focuses on raising awareness and sensitizing companies to embrace a culture of data privacy. She holds a Bachelor of Science degree from the University of the West Indies, Mona, in International Relations with a minor in Social Policy and Administration. She has earned a law degree with honors from the University of the West Indies Cayville campus in Barbados, a Master of Science at the University of Manchester in the United Kingdom in International Development Management, and is a Certified Information Privacy Manager from the International Association of Privacy Professionals. She has certifications in project management and business pitching skills from Future Leaders UK. Najuequa is a Chevening Scholar. She received the Governor General's Achievement Award for Excellence in Academics and Community Service and was inducted as an I Believe Initiative Ambassador by the Governor General. She is a director of UNESCO Clubs Jamaica, and she recently conceptualized Jamaica's first adolescent mental health conference coined Mindfulness Jamaica Initiative. As the project lead, supported by the UK's Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, out of the British High Commission, with support from members of Jamaica's Chevening alumni community. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Ms. Najuequa Barnes for the next 40 minutes.
Good afternoon, everyone. Is everyone hearing me?
Yes, we are.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that introduction, although I don't know who that person is. Thank you everyone for being here with us today. And we want to speak about a very important topic. And I think most of us can relate. Let me share my screen with you all. Let me just share my screen. Okay. All right. Is everyone seeing my screen?
We are seeing your screen, but it's
Okay.
in edit mode.
Edit. Okay, hold on. Let me just. Well, let me just put it in. Right. Is that better now?
Yes, we're seeing it in presentation mode now.
All right. Thank you. So thank you so much again for the introduction, and thanks to everyone for being here today. And within the 40 minutes that I have, which is a very short time, we're going to be covering quite a lot. I'm in lecture mode today, but I have to be mindful that I only have a limited time to explore a very, very interesting, topic that applies to most of us. I can't say with raise of hands, but anyone wants to just, agree by opening your mic quickly. How many of us, how many of our organizations here, persons are represented by various organizations actually have a remote work policy in practice or a hybrid policy where you're able to work from home? Okay, I see Mr. Trevor Forrest. Anyone else? Yeah, just one person, or probably other persons are shy. Okay, so we on the screen, the picture that we have here, it depicts this globe, and we see someone sitting in the middle, and we're surrounded by privacy. And this globe, basically, this picture is intentional because what I want to depict through this picture is that the world has shifted significantly. And we know that this shift was propelled by COVID-19, where we had no other choice based on the circumstances of the pandemic to rethink, to explore how is it that we're going to continue with our international relations? How is it that we're going to continue with business development? How is it that we're going to continue with our various engagements through working remotely? And while some aspect of remote work existed, this was significantly enhanced by COVID. And from then, you have some companies that have continued to work remotely, and you have some companies who have reverted to in office, and some companies that have adopted a hybrid model of work. So, what we want to think about is what is the current landscape and how is it that the world has evolved and will continue to evolve, especially with artificial intelligence, with different global changes, and how is it that we're going to adapt. Now, while we're thinking about that adaptation, a crucial factor that we want to consider is how do we incorporate data privacy best practices so we understand the utility, we understand the benefits of working remote. Now, we know that this can be a different lecture and debate for another day about the strengths and weaknesses, but for the purpose of today, with the limited time that we have, we want to think about what are the best practices and challenges and trends, and how within our individual rights representing our various organizations can we actually adopt remote work in a very responsible way, having data privacy considerations at the core. Now, we understand, as I said before, the shift to remote work and how it has transformed. And because it has transformed significantly, we have to think about the data privacy and security risks that comes along with that transformation. And we have to think about how is it that we're going to adopt and implement robust data protection frameworks and measures to ensure compliance and to ensure the secure handling of personal data. If you see me going a little bit quickly, just please bear with me. We just want to cover a lot in a short time. Now, the key objectives that we want to look at briefly today is to understand the evolving data privacy landscape for remote work. What does remote work look like globally and within the Jamaican context? What are the current practices? We want to identify some of the key challenges and vulnerabilities and how we can address them through adopting best practices for safeguarding the processing of personal data. We also want to discuss some trends shaping remote work security in 2025 and beyond, as the topic says. Now, I included these pictures here, just, for some fun and for us to kind of think about in a real and practical way before we delve into the whole academic aspect of it. What does remote work really look like? How many of us here can relate to the pictures here in some way, shape, or form? Anyone? Well, I can say for myself that to some extent, I can relate to some aspects of it. So I remember working at a particular organization. We had a hybrid model where persons were able to work from home 2 days per week. And there are some clients who we have who actually have a remote and hybrid policy. Now, remote work looks differently. And we see a gentleman here in the first picture with his cat, and he's sitting around with his pajama underpants, and then somebody else is in bed, another person is in the middle of the ocean, basically. And this in one instance or in some aspect of it, you're actually working and you're achieving your organization's objective. But on the other hand, there is some risk exposure to the data that you're processing. Now, what are the current remote statistics? Just to put things into context before we delve in. Now, globally, 28% of the workforce is fully remote, with over 60% working in hybrid models. So the statistics here shows us where the world is going, and this data actually increased as a result of COVID. And the references are below that you can reference later on. Now, in the United States, as of August 2024, approximately 22.8% of US employees were working remotely, an increase from 19.5%. In the UK, 2 in 5 UK employees work remotely at least 1 day a week, with office attendance rising to 60% of pre-pandemic levels. In Canada, we also have significant remote work policies, where as of May 2024, approximately 34.2% of workers were primarily working from home, the highest proportion among Canada's 15 largest metropolitan areas. Now, we just want to look quickly, what does it look like in Jamaica and within our Caribbean, Latin American region? 20% of workers um, operate remotely. And Jamaica Productivity Center did a study, and 43% of firms reported work from home arrangements as effective, while 49% found them somewhat effective. And we see where Jamaica is emerging as a strategic choice for companies seeking skilled remote workers. Now, I know people personally, and even within our firm, we actually have clients outside of Jamaica and we work remotely. Sometimes I work from home. Sometimes I'm in office, sometimes I'm at different clients. I'm all over the place, and I'm getting the work done. But while we're benefiting from the flexibility of remote work, we also have to think about what are the risk exposure. So the statistics basically here shows us that the remote work concept is actually a global movement. And this, as I said before, has significantly been increased as a result of COVID-19. Now, with the evolution of remote work, we have data privacy risks. So in terms of the picture referencing the picture that I depicted earlier, we have hybrid remote work, right? And we have fully remote work, where you have employees work exclusively from home or from any locations. And for example, you have software developers, digital marketers, and some of the best practices that we can include for persons who work exclusively remotely are, enforcing secure VPN usage for company remote access. So what this means is that you cannot just directly log on to your computer without logging in to the company's secure logging profile. Also, another important approach in implementing for exclusive remote workers is requiring multi-factor authentication for logins. So you have multiple logins to get onto the company's website, and also encrypting all files stored and transferred remotely. Now, I just want to go back here quickly. Now, for companies that have hybrid and fully remote work models, This is basically a standard that is being adopted across the US, EU, and Asia. We also have hybrid work where employees work in office and from home different days per week. And as I said before, this was something that I can relate to. And there are other companies that I know who have adopted this policy. Some professionals who adopt the hybrid model, they have finance teams, HR professionals, legal advisors, and they split the work in office and also from home. Now, some of the data privacy best practices for this type of remote work is implementing role-based access control for sensitive documents. Now, if it is that you're in an organization and you're going to have hybrid models, we have some companies that use Google Drive, you have some companies that have different remote files that people can access. But when you're working sometimes from a staggered approach, such as with hybrid models, we have to think about what files should you be accessing while you're fully in office versus while you're from home. And we also have to think about secure cloud collaboration tools such as Google Drive, Microsoft OneDrive with encryption. So if it is that you're going to be working from home, we cannot recreate the workspace within your work environment. However, you should similarly be recognizing similar secure data privacy best practices while you're at home, right? So if it is that you have a Google Drive or you have a Microsoft OneDrive system, is it that you can just access the files randomly? There should be some password protection to ensure that the files that are on your system are secure while you're working from home, and there's some level of encryption. We also have a feature that we call use zero trust security to verify all users before granting access. Now, while an employee may be in office for argument's sake, you can see the person who is accessing the file and you can say, well, Miss Barnes, Mr. Mrs. Rowe, Mr. Brown. When you are working, however, from a hybrid model, and some days you're working from home, an employee may be requesting access to a particular file. A person may want to collaborate in a Google Drive document, and you may need to grant the person access. Now, because of the remote work nature, and you cannot see the person face to face, the zero trust model basically says that never trust, always verify. What type of verification systems and measures are you going to be putting in place? So every access request, therefore, right, you have to continuously verify using multi-factor authentication, least privilege access, and strict identity verification. You also want to ensure that the network is divided into smaller network zones to limit access. So for example, if you have an attack or some data breach, that there's some level of segmentation. Now, you also have persons who work from anywhere, right? So you have employees who will be working from different locations. If you go to some coffee shops, you see people working. You have freelance consultants, you have remote executives. And this is also a greater or significant risk exposure for remote work. And some of the best practices that we can apply here is data privacy, enforcing endpoint security on personal and corporate devices. So if it is that a person is working from their personal device for argument's sake, we should ensure that there is some sort of secure system implemented on that device for them to be accessing secure files on behalf of the company. Also conduct cybersecurity training on public Wi-Fi access and phishing threats. So you have some persons, they'll be randomly connecting to public Wi-Fi, every email that they're getting, they're clicking on it, and this creates a significant risk exposure and vulnerability for the organization. So staff members sometimes can be the weakest link in an organization, and it sounds, like an insult, but it is true. So it is very important that staff members are trained about remote work best practices and the do's and don'ts of working from home. You also have digital nomads who basically they work wherever they go in the world. These includes travel bloggers, remote customer reps, content creators. And this type of nomad and, working wherever you are, it is very adventurous, it's very flexible. You have the freedom of working and earning at the same time. But what kind of security systems are you implementing to ensure that you're securely processing the personal data entrusted to you on behalf of the company, whether you're a full-time employee or whether you're a contracted or independent contractor? Now, you have to ensure that you have encrypted backup and backup solutions, mandate device tracking software in case of theft or loss, and ensure remote wipe capability for lost or stolen devices. So somebody related to me that, the person parked at a particular location and their company laptop had on some very sensitive information on behalf of the company. And unfortunately, some criminal broke into the person's vehicle and stole the company laptop, and there was a major risk exposure, right? So we have to think about how is it that we're going to, in a very practical way, when we're a digital nomad or you're working on a hybrid, whatever remote work looks like for you, how is it that you're going to be securing the information? Now, some of the common remote work tools and how can you secure them? Now, many of us use through for regular communication, Gmail, Outlook, Slack, Teams. So we have to think about, while we're using these different tools, that we have end-to-end encryption, right? And email messaging services. So we have different types of data, and there's different data classification. You have personal data and you have sensitive data. We have to think about when it is that you're sharing certain types of information with different third parties, different stakeholders, and you're working from home, particularly, especially if you're not connected through a VPN or a secure network, what type of encrypted systems can be implemented in these tools that you're using to work remotely to ensure secure transfer and to limit interception of that personal information? We also have to think about setting up automatic email encryption for confidential files. So remember, we know, as I said before, you have different types of data classification. And when you're thinking about highly confidential files, what types of automatic encryption do you have in place to ensure, for example, for the person to access the file, they have to enter a password. Is it that you're going to be using some sort of secure system to send it? You're going to limit access by ensuring that you have an access control measure in place. How are you going to ensure secure processing, especially if you're connecting to a system from home that is not secure and that can be easily intercepted? We also have to think about restricting access to company-owned email accounts only, right? So if it is that you are working for an organization, you should only be using your organization's email to send certain type of confidential files. And if it is that you're an independent contractor, the organization has to hold you accountable to ensure that you're also securely processing the confidential emails or documents entrusted to you. No, we also have cloud storage and file sharing platforms such as Google Drive, Dropbox, OneDrive, and these are popularly used by, if not all of us on the platform here. We also have to ensure that we apply strict access permission, right? Sometimes people are sharing Google documents and you have anybody can edit, anybody can share it. We have to limit access to only the persons who should be editing or reading, depending on the person's connection to the processing of that particular document. Encrypt all files stored in the cloud. Now, most companies, they outsource their cloud storage to different organizations in different countries, right? Because your organization doesn't have all the capacity for you to have backup cloud storage. And some of those cloud storage processors, they too have sub-processors who are storing or backing up that information. So you have to be reading these agreements very carefully. I remember recently we were going through one of those cloud storage processors agreement, and the cloud storage company that was used, they too had a sub-processor, and those sub-processors were located in different countries. And we don't know what those different organizations are doing with the information that is shared with them. So you also have to review these agreements to ensure that they are adhering to local data privacy laws. And you also need to know where the information is going. You also need to use audit logs to track file access and downloads. So if a person is working from home, what kind of audit logs do you have to track what documents are being accessed, what documents are being downloaded for the purpose of the work that they're going to be doing? We spoke about the virtual meeting and collaboration tools, and we know Zoom is a popular one, Teams, Google Meets. Um, what kind of email passwords do you have in place to prevent unauthorized access? So a part of the data privacy policies have to include meeting meeting policies. How do you record Zoom meetings? How do you share Zoom meetings? Does a person want his or her face to be shown? What is the policy on recording? What is the policy in sharing information? If it is that you're at a board meeting and you're going to be discussing any type of sensitive or personal information, are people aware ahead? Are people aware, how their information is going to be used, what it is going to be used for what purpose? So even though it may seem like a common practice that we're going to be having Zoom meetings or team meetings, and we use these tools popularly, especially for hybrid work or remote work strictly, do people know, do people understand what their personal information is going to be used for? So just as though we have our organizational privacy policies, we should also have a part of those privacy policies meeting policies for the secure processing of personal information where it concerns WhatsApp groups, Zoom meeting recordings. If my face is shown in a Zoom meeting, do I want that recording to be shared with a third party? How long is that information is gonna be stored? Are you gonna upload that meeting online? Do I want my face to be shown? There are so many different elements that we have to consider. That is why having this right policies in place are so important. We also, can blur our backgrounds to protect our personal environments if we're working remotely, especially if you have, confidential information. We also have remote desktop and VPNs that I spoke about earlier, and this will ensure that the connections, right, that you're connecting through are secure through the company, and that you're not exposing yourself to a privacy risk. And you're also implementing multi-factor authentication, especially for remote desktop logins, and you're regularly updating, right, and auditing your systems. Now, this is a bit controversial, and we're going to look at a case study shortly for this, because one of the features of remote work that many companies implement is workplace surveillance and productivity tracking. Now, because you're not in office where your manager can see you, the director can see you, and they can track what you're doing, there are different tools that companies use to track if it is that you're being productive, or if you're in the bed sleeping, or you're watching television, or you're probably on the beach and you're doing nothing. Now, while we understand the importance of implementing data privacy to protect the processing of personal information while you're working remotely, tied to that policy also has to be the recognition of the employees' privacy rights. And these employees, we know they're data subjects, and the data subjects are for the customers and also for your internal employees, your staff members as well. Now, while it is that you want to ensure productivity, you also have to do so while balancing the rights of your employees, right? So these monitoring and softwares that you're using to tracking remote workers, you have time tracking tools that log work hours. So you want to know how many days for the work, the days for the hours for the day a person works, what's their productivity level. You want to you want the person probably to have their webcams on to ensure they're not sleeping and the laptop just turn on and they're gone on the road and they come back and log out when the work day's finished. You want them to be screenshotting and capturing their productivity for the day. Now, these are some tools that companies use to track productivity, to track employee presence, to track their attendance, and it log their hours. But the case that we're going to look at shortly, we're going to see how the court ruled that that violated privacy rights. So how is it that we're going to stem this? How is it that we're going to ensure that we balance these rights? We have to have clear and transparent organizational policies that include remote work. How is it? What does remote work look like for your organization? Now, I remember just doing a random survey on a poll and I asked persons, do you have a remote work policy? No. Do you work remotely? Yes. What does remote work look like for your organization? So a part of the organization's internal data privacy policy, I'm not talking about your privacy notice now, I'm talking about your organization's data privacy policy. A crucial component of that should be remote work policy. What does remote work look like for my organization? And it may look differently for different organizations, whether it's exclusively remote work, and we looked at the different types of remote work earlier. Is it a hybrid model? How is it that you should be processing data? How long should you be keeping data? How is it that you must be engaging with the data? How should you be sharing data? What tools should you be used to share data? How do we classify personal from sensitive data, and how should you be sharing and receiving this different type of information? So there should be a standard policy that is instructive for employees about remote work and what it looks like. So how to implement data privacy and best practices in remote work? We have to secure remote work devices. So if a person is going to be using his or her personal device to work remotely for whatever reason, if the organization does not give you a company laptop for argument's sake, there has to be an installation of some secure system on that device, especially where you're going to be processing sensitive data on behalf of the company. You have to protect sensitive company data, right? So how is it that we are going to be classifying data that you're processing and implement automated backups to prevent data loss? And as I said before, I shared the information about the stolen laptop with you and what happened and how that created a major data breach for an organization. We also have to strengthen access control measures, especially for persons who have high profile security jobs. And I'm thinking probably we have some persons here. When you're working from home, we're not saying that you're in an untrusted environment, but we have to create a simulation as close as possible to that as if you're working in office. So if you're working from home, we don't know where you live, who you live with. You're probably having a meeting discussing financial records for the company. You're discussing people's names, their addresses. You're part of a public registry and you're working remotely that day. You have a fast neighbor next door listening to your meeting conversation. Are you aware of your surrounding and how high your voice is when you're speaking, and especially if you're speaking about something personal? So separate and apart from the security features, there are also simple adjustments that we have to bear in mind, and because we are so common in our practices, we're not really thinking about it. But it's just simple as, who is at home? Am I leaving my laptop open if I'm going to use the restroom? Am I leaving the laptop in the car in just open space, downtown parking somewhere, and I'm going to be absent for a while, knowing that somebody is going to steal the computer? Am I in a coffee shop having a very important meeting where I'm discussing confidential information that should not be disclosed to anyone else? Am I receiving information or files through WhatsApp groups and it's just on my phone that my son can just go and put in the password, or he's so smart and he's accessing in files? Am I sending highly confidential information through unsecured email channels? So when we think about it, we have daily and common practices, and we're not really thinking about the secure processing, especially when we're in the comfort of our homes. As I said, showed you in the picture, somebody's in, his pajama, you're very comfortable, you're relaxed working from home, and you're on your computer, it's left open, you're gone, somebody's accessing personal information on the laptop. You're having a meeting, you're speaking on top of your voice, somebody next door heard the information. We also spoke about training employees and cybersecurity awareness. Are your staff members sensitive about phishing attacks? Are they sensitive about what the remote work policy looks like for your organization? If you don't yet have one, then it is very important that you implement one and that the entire organization is trained on remote work policies. Even if it's just for one person, what does it look like for the organization from a policy perspective, and how should you actually be processing the information? Now, you have persons who live in Jamaica, but they work for companies all over the world, and global data protection laws will also apply to those individuals that will guide how is it they're processing personal data. And you have to ensure that you're updating your data privacy policy, especially we're talking about remote work now, to align with international requirements, especially if you're working for a company outside of Jamaica. Now, what are some of the key privacy risks? We spoke about them earlier. Data breaches for insecure home networks. Is your home network that you're connecting to work remotely secure? You need to have this assessed by your internal IT system team to ensure that the system that you're connecting from through your home is secure. If it is that they're not going to implement a VPN system for you to connect through. Unauthorized access to sensitive data. Are you are you being negligent rather, and exposing the company's personal information to unauthorized official? It could be a husband, it could be a wife, it could be a child, just anybody at home, or if you're in the coffee shop, wherever you're working, or other unauthorized persons having access to the personal information. Also want to think about lack of endpoint security, unsecured personal devices. If you're working on a personal device, do you have any secure systems implemented to protect the secure processing of personal data? And we also spoke about compliance challenges with global data protection laws. And if you're working for companies outside of Jamaica, those laws will also apply to you. Now, some of the major challenges for remote work also include device security. We spoke about that. Cloud storage and shadow IT, unprotected networks, people randomly connecting to public Wi-Fi on their phones, human error, and we spoke about ensuring that your staff members are trained to limit that human error. Regulatory compliance. Do your staff members know and understand what laws apply and what the implications are, and why is it important to protect data that they're processing to, by extension, protect the company that they're working for? And we have international observations of companies like Germany and Canada. It's a mandatory part of their remote work policy that they have continuous audits for their remote work staff members to ensure that there are limited cybersecurity threats. So we understand the policy, the risks, we understand some of the challenges. Now, what are some of the best practices? How can we actually implement secure practices to ensure that we are in keeping with data privacy standards when we're working remotely? So you have to strengthen device security. So we have to understand, yes, you're a subject matter expert in your particular field in your organization, but is your organization making you, aware about the device security and the security features on the system to ensure that you know what you need to do, and how the laptop, how the systems that you're using, different tools, different remote work tools, how they should be secured when you're working remotely. You also have to mandate the use of corporate managed devices or secure personal device policies. So, for example, Japan's corporate sector enforced device isolation policies, limiting corporate access to specific managed device only. Now, we have to think, even though Jamaica, is not there yet, we also have to be mindful of what is happening globally and how do we fit into this global picture, and what are some of the best practices that we can apply. We spoke about the VPN earlier and the end-to-end encryption. We also spoke about the multi-factor authentication. Um, we also spoke about the remote work data policies. So we have an organization that we had to draft a remote policy for earlier. So if you don't yet have a remote policy for your organization, you want to think seriously about, as a part of your internal data privacy policy, how is it that we're going to be drafting, probably incorporating a remote work policy into that existing organizational privacy policy? Or if you have an extensive remote work practice, how is it that you can draft a separate remote work policy that provides clear guidelines about how staff members should be operating remotely and what are the implications for data breaches? Um, so we spoke about all of that. Now, what I want to look at quickly, because I'm looking at the time, is how is it within the local Jamaican context does the Jamaica Data Protection Act applies to remote work? Now, while the Jamaica Data Protection Act is not explicit about data privacy provisions that speaks about remote work, there are different aspects of the standards that do apply and hold organizations accountable for remote work. So, for example, the first standard that speaks about fair and lawful processing. The applicability, that is section 2022, it says remote workers should ensure they have legitimate grounds for processing personal data and that such processing is transparent to the data subject, right? For example, data purpose limitation, section 2025, you have to ensure that the purpose for which you're processing the data when you're working remotely, that you are avoiding unauthorized use of that information, especially if you're not working in office and if you're working from home, that you're only processing the information in keeping with the organization's mandate, especially your particular role. We also have to think about storage limitation, section 28, that's the fifth standard. Remote workers should adhere to data retention clause and securely delete data that is no longer needed or required. So how are you storing the information at your house? Are you having it lying around? How long are you keeping it? What is the organization's data retention policy as it pertains to persons who are working remotely? And we also have to think about what type of information are persons allowed to take home, to take on the beach, to take wherever they're working remotely. So organizations have to think about, is it that we're going to create a secure folder where persons are going to have a strict access multi-factor authentication password? Are persons going to be taking home people's IDs, taking home people's birth certificates? What files, what personal documents as a part of your remote work policy should people actually be taking home? How can people access it? What should they be doing it? How are you going to limit the risk exposure? And this is a serious consideration when you're thinking about maintaining efficiency, you are optimizing your work time working remotely, and what types of documents are going to be limiting persons taking home when they're working remotely. So what are some of the trends to look out for 2025 and beyond? Now we know and we understand that AI basically is developing, it is evolving beyond what we can keep up with. And some of the current trends that we need to be mindful of is AI-driven threat detection for remote environments. So we do have some AI systems that organizations can implement as a part of their remote work policy and security system to detect threats when employees are working from home. And these are automated tools that organizations can implement for compliance monitoring. We also can look at zero trust architecture, right? And we spoke about this earlier. Every access request is continuously verified using multi-factor authentication, and least privileged access is it's strictly identity verification. So if a person is working from home, you want to ensure that there is a strict policy in place for authentication and verification, because you don't know who is accessing what, who is seeking, verification for what, who is seeking to be accessing whatever documents. And you also want to divide your network into smaller segments to ensure secure zones and to limit access, especially to limit any data breaches by hackers. We also want to think about a decentralized identity management system. So users store and manage their credentials securely on a decentralized ledger, reducing reliance on a third-party verification. And also organizations can implement an advanced technique using biometric data such as facial recognition, fingerprint scanning, other biometric behavior. And these are some developments that some countries are already using for remote work. And it is a way of them trying to secure personal data. We also want to increase focus on employee privacy rights and regulations. And we spoke about balancing privacy. We also spoke about balancing privacy of the organization with that of the employees. So what are some actionable steps that your organization can take? You want to review and update a remote work policy. So if you don't yet have a policy, we need to discuss at the organizational level through your data protection officer, through your board of directors. We need to make a recommendation to ensure that we are drafting and implementing a remote work policy for the organization that is instructive about how is it that employees right across the board should be processing data. We also spoke about the zero trust, training employees securing all remote work devices. If you're whether you're using personal or company laptop, company tools, monitor compliance as well. Now I want to look at this quickly in 5 minutes. I know time is going. Just please give me a little grace. I want to pull everything together with this case study. And this case study is very important for us to look at quickly because what it does is, on the one hand, it shares with us the importance of pulling together everything that we just looked at a very high level very quickly in terms of adopting data privacy policies for remote work. But there's a thin line in doing so, and as it relates to breaching employees' privacy rights. So while we just shared the actionable steps, right? How can we implement these actionable steps through implementing the policies, implementing zero trust principles, training our staff, securing our devices through our different software AI systems that we're going to be adopting, and these trends that we spoke about earlier, or decentralized identity management model or AI privacy security systems. How can we do so by adhering to the rights and balancing the rights of our data subjects, which is the core aspect of our data privacy laws in Jamaica, and also ensure that the organization's personal data that is being processed by the employee is secure. Now, I'm not going to read the case in the interest of time, but the essence of this case was an IBM employee lawsuit in 2022. And it was a very controversial case because a part of an approach taken by IBM in terms of in helping the company to secure its personal data for remote work was basically telling the employees that, listen, you have to keep your webcam on because we need to be monitoring what you're doing. We need to have remote work surveillance. We need to ensure that you are being productive throughout the day and not sleeping on the job, and we need to ensure that our personal data entrusted to you through your remote work is being secured. Now, the court ruled in favor of the employee, stating that forcing workers to keep their webcams on violates their right to privacy under the GDPR. And this case highlighted the growing tension between companies trying to monitor remote work, productivity, and employee rights. All of these softwares that companies are recommended to use, and look at the developing trends, especially with artificial intelligence and tracking productivity, monitoring software systems and activities. We also have to understand the extent to which these are infringing on the privacy rights of the employees. So the court basically ruled, let me just read the ruling quickly and then we wrap up. Forcing employees to use webcams all day violates their privacy rights. Employee monitoring should be appropriate and justified. I think I'm gone, sorry. Remote work performance should be assessed based on work outcomes and not surveillance. So while we want to adopt these current trends, while we want to implement our remote work privacy policies, we also have to do so in a way that balances the privacy rights of our stakeholders, our data subjects, and those who we serve. So Um, the impact of this case, it basically demonstrated the stronger legal protections for remote workers, shifting remote work monitoring practices and increased employee awareness and resistance to surveillance. So we have to understand the privacy laws within the Jamaican landscape and also international privacy laws as well. Because when we're thinking about remote work, we're also thinking about engaging with people across the world. Because what remote work does, it shrinks the physical space in terms of how we communicate and share personal information. So we also have to think about what type of monitoring systems are we putting in place for hybrid and remote work, and how will that not infringe on data privacy rights while we're seeking as organizations to protect the personal data entrusted to us. So the key takeaway here is that we want to ensure that we are balancing the conflict of remote work by adhering to privacy rights. And organizations have to rethink about what kind of systems they're going to be putting in place. So when you're drafting your privacy policies, you want to have clear instructions that are specific to your organizations. But from a general data privacy perspective, you also have to ensure that the rights of the employees who are working remotely are balanced with the rights of the organization. Now, these are the references, and I would take your questions, comments, and concerns here. And I'm sorry if I was rushing a bit, but it was just a lot to cover in a very short time.
Right. Thank you, Miss Barnes. That was really a mouthful. We'll allow you to catch your breath. Well, I
Yes.
advise the entire grouping here that you all failed the test at the beginning because my avatar was the one introducing you, and it had not been given an identity. And so, in speaking, we all listened to what I said about your exploits, but nobody really questioned whether or not it was a human being speaking to them. In the age of misinformation, disinformation, and deep fakes, we should all be a little bit more proactive in trying to ensure that we're interacting with a human. Thank you for that. And it really was a very eye-opening expose on just some of the challenges that we have with respect to remote work. The hyper-digitization that was foisted upon us by the pandemic will not go away. It will be tempered somewhat, but that hybridized format of approaching productivity will remain with us. And so we have to ensure that we leverage all the technology sets to achieve the protection of data, the privacy of all concerned, and secure the environments within which it works. Are there any questions from the audience for Ms. Barnes at this time?
Questions, comments, concerns? Thank you. Yes, Mr. Livingston Burnett. Yes, Mr. Burnett. Thank you, Regina.
Oh, yes. Thanks for acknowledging me. I was a little late, but I think I caught most of the presentation. So thank you again. I have a little challenge. I am a justice of the peace. I don't know if this is the place to ask this question, but so as a justice of the peace, I'm required to have a log of my activities. That log includes the date that I authenticate a document, for example, the ID number for the person, usually their TRN or elector registration ID number or their NIS number, their full name, and the activity that I carried out on their behalf. And then at the end of each calendar year, I'm supposed to submit that log to my custos in a report. How does the Data Protection Act, what are my obligations under the Data Protection Act based on what I've just described? I'm not sure if you can help me with that.
Sure, sure. Thank you for that question, Mr. Burnett. That's a very, very important question, actually, one that I'm not really interested in. So based on what you described to me, having that log, is it a requirement from any laws that governs what you do as a justice of the peace that requires you to keep that log, number one? Number two, that's a question. Number
Yes.
two, do the persons aware whose information that you're collecting, are they aware that you're actually retaining this type of information? Are they aware the purpose for which you're going to be using it and how long you're going to be keeping it? Because what the Data Protection Act requires, based on what you just asked, is that the data subjects, the persons with whom you're engaging, that they know that you are actually collecting their information, the purpose for which you're going to be using it, who is it going to be shared with, how long is it going to be stored. So they may come to you to sign, to certify a particular document. You will need to communicate to them as it's required by the Data Protection Act that Najuequa Barnes, you have asked me to certify this document for you. I am required by so and so policy that I keep this log. I'm going to keep this log for this year, and I'm going to need your information. I'm going to store it in this secure way, and this is when I'm going to dispose it. Now, if it is that I want to access this service from you, then by virtue of that engagement, that business relationship, I I would be agreeing. However, I also am at liberty to disagree with you that I do not want to give my information to you. So the persons who you are communicating to based on Data Protection Act, you need to be informing them the purpose of which you are going to be collecting their information, and they need to be aware for the purpose that you are going to be using and storing and sharing that information. So,
Okay.
just to wrap up that response, I would advise that there is some general data privacy notice through the organization responsible for justice of the peace in Jamaica that is noted on their website to say, as an organization, as a custos, for example, we are required to collect information to store a log of the information for persons whose JPs are going to be certifying their information. This is why we're collecting it. This is how long we're going to store it. So persons need to know. And the different standards in the Jamaica Data Protection Act is very clear and instructive about that, and that can be easily captured in a privacy notice that is communicated to the persons who are seeking your services.
Okay. Thank you so very much.
You're welcome.
And the answer to your question that you asked, yes, it is actually in the Justice of the Peace Act of 2021, I think it is, or 2020 2018. Um, the part about the yes, so the log is there, and then the schedule, I think it's schedule one or two. It's a form that you fill out, and
Mhm.
then it asks you to attach the log that you have created over the year. What it does not do, though, it does not tell you how long the information is going to be stored for.
So
Because
there needs to be some discussion about a data retention policy, and because you have multiple persons seeking the services of justice of the peace, throughout Jamaica, I think it is strongly advised that there is a privacy notice that is done as soon as possible and posted on the website of your organization to communicate to persons that this is what Justice of the Peace Act provides, this is the law, and this is the purpose of which we're going to be collecting your information. This is how long we're going to store, this is what we're going to be using it for, and this is how long we're going to keep it so persons know. I mean, it's going to be
okay.
very difficult for each time somebody comes to you, for you to be telling them that all the time, but it should be generally communicated as best as possible.
So the irony about this is that the justices of the peace fall under the Ministry of Justice.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay, okay, okay.
so, and then for me to be asking this question in this forum, sort of. So I will see if I can get audience with my custos and audience with my Minister of Justice to for them to sort that part out. And then the other thing too is that not all justices of the peace keep this log that I keep. I guess because I'm a newbie on a new kid on the block. When you just come in, you abide by everything. And as
Yes.
time goes on, you start to slacken off. So
Okay.
for example, when I'm authenticating documents, I say to persons, may I have your driver's license, please? And they say, why do you need my driver's license? I say, well, I have to keep a log of the information. I have to keep a log of the work that I do, which captures some of the information on your driver's license and the sort. So I will go into a little more detail with them so they can understand and then give them the opportunity to accept or refuse my service due to the fact that I will
Okay.
have to store this information on them.
Okay. Yeah, it's important that that conversation is had, but I
Yes.
think, from a policy point of view and based on what the Data Protection Act requires, that this is communicated clearly through your privacy notice posted on your website, and that the various justice of the peace are trained on this privacy policy, and that persons who are engaging with you, even at a high level, that whenever the question is asked, you're able to respond to them. Because, as I said, the Data Protection Act, it really was designed for data subjects, and it puts the pressure on the data controller to ensure that secure systems are put in place to protect the information of the person's people's information that they're processing. So people need to know that there's a log, and why is my information being logged, and what are you going to do with it? So I think that privacy notice is going to be very important.
Thank you so very much.
You're most welcome. Any other questions? Am I out of time? Can we take any more questions? Even if it's not related to remote work, but any data privacy questions.
I am not seeing any hands in the room. Um, we are out of time, but since you're willing to answer some questions, I have about three for you.
Okay.
And so we will probably do them in reverse order. Ms. Barnes, how much equity should there be in the responsibility to secure home-based systems in order to facilitate remote work from a data protection, privacy, and a cybersecurity standpoint?
I think that if we take the approach of privacy by design, that it should be data privacy should be an integrated approach for remote work, whereby even though we're going to be having standard privacy policies that speaks about remote work and how personal data should be handled, from a strict data privacy perspective, um, where when you're thinking about having remote work policies, or people are going to be working hybrid, whether full-time, working wherever, remote work, whatever remote work looks like that we described earlier, that the organization invest in secure systems, invest in secure networks, invest in policies, invest in whatever secure means possible, because data privacy really should be integrated strategically into the organization's operations. So that equity should be significant, because when you look at the Data Protection Act, it is really putting the obligation on the data controller to ensure that as a part of its general operations, that data privacy is integrated into the day-to-day considerations of the entity. And unlike the GDPR, where the liability is dispersed between the data controller and the data processor, all of that liability lies on the data controller. So it is therefore in the best interest of the organization to invest securely, it significantly, because of that liability. You're muted.
I'll just ask one more. Well,
Did,
there's
did
a
I
hand.
did I did I did I
No.
respond to your question clearly?
To an extent, but the follow-up question will allow you to finalize your response. Mr. Livingston,
Okay.
is that a new hand or a legacy hand? Okay, maybe a legacy hand.
It's a new hand, sorry.
Go ahead with
It's
your
a new
question.
hand.
Go ahead, sir.
Right. So I was just looking in the chat and somebody was saying that they would like to know more about the encryption protection.
Okay. So the recommendation is that for data, from a data classification point of view, the encryption is mostly recommended where you're for, within the context of remote work. I'm responding to that question. When you're going to be sharing highly sensitive data, that the information that is sent from, through to the company, to external parties, to whomever, that you have a higher level of security to safeguard that personal data. So, for example, if you're going to be using your usual emails for argument's sake, what added layer of security can you implement to ensure or to prevent or minimize interception of the email or the documents contained in that email? Because if you're going to just be using a simple, your regular emails, does that email have a heightened level of security to ensure that information is protected? You can also think about having some password protection for the documents to ensure that the person who receives it, for argument's sake, only that person can access the document. So it's adding a higher level of security to um to safeguard the secure processing of personal data. Um, you're muted. You
So
had
I
a follow-up
hope
question.
that
You had a follow
answered,
you had a follow-up question.
right. I hope that answered the question for Value Drug Pharmacy out of Trelawney. Um, the follow-up question is, what advice would you give to employees whose entities are seeking to implement multi-factor authentication, but are unable to provide a secondary means of authentication and insist that personal devices be used?
That is somewhat challenging because um basically, if I understand what you're saying that if it is that the organization is unable to provide a multi-factor authentication, but they insist that their security and personal devices, is that what you're asking? No, hold on. You're
So they're,
muted.
they're, they're seeking to implement multi-factor authentication as an added layer of security, but they're
Mm-hmm.
unable to provide a second corporate device. So that person might be using,
Okay,
but
I
can't get
understand you.
a CUG phone, for example.
Yes. So they have to use their personal device for that secondary level of security authentication. Um, well, I guess this has to be clearly communicated to the employees that the organization doesn't, I presume, doesn't have the resources to provide, for example, a CUG or a secondary corporate device to facilitate that multi-factor authentication. However, if it is that they have to use their personal devices, that some level of security is also implemented by the organization on those personal devices to facilitate the multi-factor authentication, and there's a level of communication as to why the company cannot provide those resources, but also explain the need and the purpose of which why this is so important to be facilitated to secure, to add another layer of security for the personal data processing, especially within the context of remote work. Because if they can't provide the resources, but it is needed, then it's a matter of really explaining why the organization doesn't have or don't have the resources. And if it is that person will have to use his or her personal device for the multi-factor authentication, then it's either the company is going to be implementing some sort of security, and if they cannot, they have to further explain the lack of resources, but why this is required and how is it going to benefit the employee as well by them facilitating that.
Thank you very much. I am not seeing any further questions, and
Does that answer your question?
it does address the concern that was raised in another forum by employees who are literally being told that, yeah, we understand it's your personal device, but you should be able to authenticate, or you should be able to do work, read emails while you're offsite. And the question really came down to a matter of resources. And so the point you made about having that conversation and explaining the position of the entity vice the ask of the employee is something that has to take place per the different nuances for each individual entity.
Yeah, because you realize it's really, as I said before, it's really a matter of the only reason a company would have that ask is because of lack of resources. And if it's a matter of lack of resources, then they would have to communicate to the employees while this is the position and we understand the pushback, highlight the benefit to the employee. How is it going to benefit me? So even though you are asking this of me and you're unable to provide um, all the necessary tools and resources, what incentive or what reason, what benefit am I going to gain by facilitating this ask? So I think when a company is unable to provide something, I think the best approach is to highlight to the employee, especially from a security perspective, what are the implications for the employees not facilitating, and what are the benefits for facilitating, even though the company doesn't have the resources, and what kind of risk exposure is, will be created by not facilitating.
Absolutely. I thank you for that. The final question from Balford. Go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone.
Good
My
afternoon.
question, I'm just doing a following up on that one. I have a question, but I just wanted to follow up on the one we were just talking about, because I also faced that one where we
Mhm.
explain to the individual about the resources, and we cannot justify giving a CUG just for authenticator. And when you just explain to them that the software version is just an app just for you to verify to go into your email, they still are saying they're not putting company stuff on their phone because we're going to track their phone or anything like that. So when they mentioned that we would have to secure their phone as well, that would be too far because they already having an issue just for us to put their multi-factor on their phone. So we have to try to find workaround by getting token and stuff like that.
Thank you for that, Balfour. I think um it's important to make these provisions in your organization's privacy policy as to what are the workarounds and to also communicate to the staff what is the company's objective. So I believe that if each organization should have a data privacy strategic policy and then have a work plan from that. So just as though you're going to plan strategically, for the company's finances, revenue generation, and meeting its organizational mandate, a part of that should be, what is the organization strategic data privacy policy. And all the employees should be on board and should be a part of that, separate and apart from the privacy team who will be driving implementation. Because what I find from through working with various organizations is that once you have buy-in from your staff, not just the data protection officer or the privacy team, it drives greater compliance within the organization. So the privacy policy is one that has to be communicated. Why is it that we're doing this? We understand the shortcomings, and there has to be a change management approach as well, Balfour, when people are used to doing things a certain way, you come and tell them, oh, you can't do this no more now because data protection access, or you're gonna have to do this on your phone now. And they're gonna say, it's my phone, you're giving me phone, So I think, we have to kind of wean into it and we have to have conversations, and we have to take a phased approach, and we have to ensure that there is right tailored training for organizations that welcomes the buy-in from staff right across the board, not just at the board level or the CEO, but the auxiliary staff, the security guards. Everyone needs to understand the role that each person plays in driving compliance throughout the organization. And why are we as an organization asking you to facilitate this? And you also make provisions in your organization privacy policy that is communicating to the entire organization the role that they have to play.
Okay, I understand. Thank you. All right, I'll be
You're
quick with my question. My question, we provide IT service to small and medium-sized business. When we know how to do the technical aspect, the backup, the multi-factor, all of those that you mentioned, putting stuff in place, putting limitation, the drawback has always been the legal aspect of it. Some of it is not really clear when we're going through it. Is there somewhere that we can go just to get a full understanding? Because when you want to communicate it to the client to explain why it is put in place, the technical part is always easy, but it's the other side, the legal side, that is not so clear with some of the jargons that are used.
Okay, well, you have companies like my company or company that provides a multifaceted approach to data privacy. You have other established privacy practitioners in Jamaica as well that offers, a full suite of services. Because when you look at the eight standards, technical organizational measures is one critical standard, but not the only standard. So when you are communicating to your various clients, they need to understand what the legal provisions are and how the work that you do fits into the bigger scheme of things from a legal perspective. So, you can see consultation from us, from other, data privacy experts in the field to guide you through understanding the legal application of what you do. And I think that will share a greater appreciation for your clients.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, because just to add lastly, because data privacy is really a multifaceted approach. You're thinking about the IT technical aspect, you're thinking about understanding the legal responsibilities and reading and interpreting legislation. And you're also thinking about risk assessment. You're also thinking about change management. So you have to think about all factors coming together to have a comprehensive data privacy plan for an organization. It has to be multifaceted.
Right. Thank you, Ms. Barnes. You have really sort of whetted the appetite for greater compliance with data protection regimes, not just the DPA 2020 here in Jamaica, but also those other laws that touch us, given our reliance, for example, on tourism. We have come to the end of today's session, and I really want to thank the audience for their patience in staying with us largely throughout the session. I will send you the bill for that advert for UCI Consult, and we will earn a little money from that. But
Yes.
also to the team from the Cyber Incident Response Team Division that really put this together at short notice and worked with you to make it happen. It couldn't really happen if persons didn't join. And so I want to thank you all. I am Lieutenant Colonel Godfrey Sterling, the director of the Cyber Incident Response Team. And, it is good to have an avatar that is almost lifelike. I look forward to seeing you at our next installation of our webinar series as we drive through 2025, having listened to some of the challenges in implementing data protection standards, the best practices that we can use, whether we're large, small, or individual, as well as the trends to look for, because sometimes it's those trends that allow us to see what we can do creatively to ensure that we achieve compliance. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a pleasure hosting you today, and I look forward to seeing you at the next installation of a Cyber Incident Response Team Division webinar. thank you very much. For those of you who have to travel, be safe. And for those of you who don't, walk good.
Thank you, everyone, and feel free to reach out, and thank you for engaging with us today.
Thank you again, ma'am.
All
Good day.
right, bye-bye.